Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening to everyone out there listening to WCATradio.com. My name is Robert Madrigal, the host of this show, Know Your Faith, a forum for those who know the faith, a source for those who would like to get to know the faith. AKA Unapologetically Apologetics. Now, on this show, we talk about Catholic apologetics, and we are unapologetic about our love for God, our love for Christ, and our love for the Catholic Church, which are one and the same. This week, I have something special in mind. I have written a series of shows where we will talk about the real sticky issues. We've been dealing with some of the basics up until now, and I feel that it's getting a little bit boring. Time for the serious stuff. What I'm talking about are issues like the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and scandals in the Church. I mean to say there are ways to defend the Church against attacks where someone might use these issues against us. Now, for the most part, we are dealing with myths here. Myths that started out as rumors a few hundred years ago, or even a couple of thousand years ago, and have gotten out of hand since then and have now become myths. They are just like the rumors that are being spread against the Church nowadays, and I call those future myths. Well, before we get into tonight's topics, I would like to start the show off right with a prayer. And we'll begin our prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come to you in great thanksgiving this evening for this opportunity to come together as brothers and sisters in Christ, so that we may learn more about our faith, for the sake of defending the faith. We ask that you will grant us the strength to explain and defend our faith with patience and charity, and to see challenges to our faith as a chance to evangelize and to spread the love and peace of Christ to all whom we come in contact with. And to do this through the example of self-sacrifice that Christ provides for us through his death on the cross. And we'll ask this through the glorious name of Christ our Lord. Amen. And we'll end our prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. So, before we get into tonight's real issues, the real sticky stuff I was talking about, I would like to talk about faith. What faith means, what faith is, why we have faith. And that's the reason why I named this show, tonight's show, Why We Believe, Atheism versus Theism. So I would like to talk about the word faith for just a moment. And just to put it into perspective, I'd like to tell you about a television debate that I was watching a few years ago between a Christian and an atheist. Now, during the debate, the atheist stated, "I don't have faith because I'm not a complete idiot." That's her exact words. Well, if we were to ponder on that statement for just a moment, I'm sure that we would see that the person that made that statement didn't put much thought into what she said. For instance, let's first consider the meaning of the word faith. Philosophers define the word faith in two ways, or there's two definitions of the word faith. Number one, the assent of the mind to something as true on the authority of the one declaring it to be so. And number 2, a state of mind whereby a person ascends to truths that are not seen and cannot be proven, but taken on the trust in the reliability of another, i.e. a witness or an authority. So with that, what we need to realize is that most everything we do on a daily basis is based on faith. When I read today's newspaper in the morning, or when I read today's newspaper this morning, I took it on faith that the newspaper reporter was telling the truth. The reporters that write the stories in the newspaper must take it on faith that the eyewitnesses are telling them the truth. But now consider this. If a child is told by a teacher, a scientist, or a mentor of any kind that God does not exist, then that child must take it on faith that the mentor is stating what is true. But on the other hand, faith in God is also taught to us by our parents. My parents taught me a belief in God from a very young age, and I took it on faith that God exists. But then as adults, we come to the point where we must choose which one of the two beliefs to have faith in. And that's due to all the propagation or the propaganda, from both sides. Both atheists and theists are working hard to win us over to their side. Atheists say that a belief in God is old-fashioned and going out of style. I've heard that at least a dozen times. But then the same person might say that we're all born atheists. If the first statement is true, then atheism goes back farther in history than theism does. And both ideas would have to be old-fashioned. I believe that atheism is not just a 20th century invention, but it has been around at least as long as theism has, a belief in God has. If we look at the atheist view, it seems to me to be very unreasonable to state with 100% certainty that God does not exist. To state that God does not exist will forever remain an unsubstantiated statement, as it is impossible to prove. Now, there's a challenge that the atheists face, and I call it the problem of creation. Sometimes I say the problem of existence. And the problem is that creation exists. We don't have to think long and hard on that point because we are all part of it and we're all wrapped up in it. So then it becomes impossible to explain where it comes from without the belief in an omnipotent, an omnipotent, eternal being, or in other words, God. Like I always say, creation demands a creator. So the burden of proof is on the atheist, because he would either have to explain away creation or explain where creation comes from. And that's where we get really crazy ideas like the Matrix and string theory and all this other stuff. And this is because one would have to show that the universe and everything that exists within it began from absolutely nothing and without help from anyone whatsoever. Reason tells us two things. Number one, that it is impossible to get something from absolutely nothing. And number two, it is impossible for creation to happen at random for no reason whatsoever. It would take a being powerful enough to make it happen. And this is especially true when you consider all the marvels that we know to exist in the universe today through science. But some scientists who are also atheists have come up with scientific models which they claim to show, or can show, that it was possible that the universe was created when two streams of electric current had a collision with one another, therefore causing the Big Bang. Now, this is something which they call stream theory. Well, there are two major problems with stream theory. First, stream theory would be impossible to prove because we are talking about an event which scientists claim to have happened 14 billion years ago, and no one was around to witness that. Second, the theory says nothing to address the period before the collision of the two streams. What made those two streams collide? And what made those two streams to exist? What brought them to exist in the first place? The belief that the two streams of electric current existed in the first place means that they must have had a beginning. If they had a beginning, they must have been created. Now, this leaves us with the same problem of creation. If the two streams are what caused creation, then what caused the two streams? So all in all, if stream theory were even possible, it's absolutely improbable without an eternal, omnipotent God to create the streams and therefore make it happen. It seems to me that it is much more reasonable to have a belief in an eternal God. But allow me to explain. The universe exists within time and space. And the very nature of time and space shows us that everything that exists within them, time and space, has a beginning, goes through change, and comes to an end. Since both time and space each have a beginning, there was a point where they began, or a time when they were created. Both science and reason tells us that much. So since they were created, there must be a creator. Like I always say, and I'm going to repeat it again from earlier tonight, you can't have creation without a creator. The objection then becomes that if everything that is created requires a creator, then who created the creator? Atheists love to ask that question. Well, that is a very clever ruse, but it does not answer any questions. It certainly does not answer the problem of creation. As I say, it's not a problem that we were created, but the problem is you have to show where creation came from. This ruse just poses new questions. When someone asks, who created the creator? Then we must go on to ask, then who created the creator of the creator? So then, who created the creator of the creator of the creator? Etc., and so on and so forth. So we have to stop and ask ourselves, how long can we keep that objection going on? For an eternity? I think not. The approach, or this approach, not only fails to solve the problem of creation, but it multiplies the problem. An analogy that comes to mind is when a waitress, let's just say there's a waitress who's pouring coffee into a cup, and the cup starts to overflow. Instead of stopping the flow, she keeps pouring the hot coffee into the cup after it's overflowing onto the floor and onto the customer's lap. Then after that pot's empty, she'll go and get another pot that's full and continue to pour the coffee into the cup. She's not solving the problem by doing that. And that's exactly what the question, who created God, does. What I'm talking about is what we call eternal regression, which basically means that creation itself is eternal. The idea of eternal regression is not only very unreasonable, but it's also impossible. On the other hand, one eternal creator is not only far more reasonable, it's far more probable. And it's not in any way impossible, in the very least. The problem of creation is then solved because the Creator is eternal. No beginning and no end. I know that's very hard to understand. It might even be impossible for some people to understand that God is eternal, and that means He has no beginning and no end. But we have creation, and we have an eternal Creator. In short, and to quote St. Thomas Aquinas, reason compels us to believe that there must have been someone whom has always existed, what St. Thomas Aquinas called a prime mover. Now, between atheists and theists, we who believe in God, dealing with people who do not believe in God, if we were to use reason and reason alone, without all the charts and graphs, without all the instruments and measurements, without all the points and counterpoints, if we were to put all the politics to the side and deal with each other with respect for one another's views, in order to focus in on what makes the most sense, we would be able to see that the truth is clear. Without eternity, time and space would not exist. Without an eternal creator, creation would not exist. Now, some scientists will tell you that evolution is the way that life began on Earth. But when you think about it, the very notion of evolution suggests order. For instance, a maple tree does not produce a palm tree, and you can never get a cow from a dog, or vice versa. In other words, life does not reproduce at random. There's order to it. So even if the theory of evolution were to be proven 100% true and correct, then the fact of evolution would then point towards a creator who used evolution as a means to an end. Or as some theist scientists out there would say, intelligent design. Moreover, the theory of evolution can never tell us where Earth or the universe and everything that exists within it came from. Darwin left much to be desired when he wrote his book, The Origin of Species. To follow what Darwin wrote, it's like saying that one can jump in a car while it's driving on its own at 40 miles an hour and claim that they can take the car from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? One would have to enter the car while it's parked, start the car, and then move it from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds in order to make that claim, wouldn't they? Another analogy, a man who won big at the casino could not start to count his claim tickets at the number 50 and go on from there. The casino officials would have him start his count at the number 0 for an accurate count before handing him his winnings. He wouldn't be able to start his count at 50. He'd have to start it at 0. Now, what Darwin does is far more manufactured than even that. He starts the history of creation at 4 billion, even if years ago, therefore leaving out the 9 billion years prior to that. Or even, he's not even starting at 4 billion. What he's doing is starting at a few 100 million years ago, is what he does. So here again I can say, even if the theory of evolution was to be proven to be 100% correct and true, it only goes back to when life on Earth was at its starting point and cannot explain anything before that point. So all in all, I have to repeat it one more time. It is much more reasonable to conclude that anything that is made takes someone to make it. It is built, someone had to have built it. Likewise, since Earth and all life on Earth was created, it took someone to create it. I choose to have faith in the belief that there is an all-knowing, omniscient, all-seeing, and all-powerful, omnipresent, omnipotent, eternal God, who created the universe and everything that is in it. Well, those are my thoughts on why we believe atheism versus theism. And now I'd like to get into another presentation. And this one I call Misinformation. Myths, Lies, and Videotape. Now, the thesis of this presentation is propaganda and how it's used against our church. So I'd like to start off with the way that we, as a society, and mostly the media, use information and the play on words whenever we have a point to make. I always use the example of a story where a newspaper editor back in the late 1700s took a competitor's newspaper story of a slave ship uprising that was titled Massacre at Sea, and he changed the entire context of the story by changing just 2 words in the title. His new title read, Freedom Fight at Sea. And that's because he was part of the abolitionist society. The abolitionists that wanted to get rid of slavery. And the change was a good thing. But I have this demonstration that I put together on a PowerPoint where I take some text on a screen that reads Miss America. And I put this up on the screen in preparation for the presentation. Now you have to use your imagination here. When everyone starts arriving for the presentation, they sometimes make comments, Miss America, why does he have Miss America on there? So what's on the screen will grab their attention. Then I steal their attention by standing off to the side of the screen, and I have it set up to where an assistant changes the screen for me. If you know how PowerPoint works, when you click, the screen will change. So they don't see me doing it. I have an assistant doing it, and I use large hand movements to grab the audience's attention. So if you can use your imagination for a minute, while I'm standing off to the side of the screen, I start in with the scripted lecture. While the text on the screen will change and morph with subtle changes in spelling from Miss America to Miss American to Miss Americanization to misinformation. Now this is just a demonstration and a dumb idea that I put together quick and crude to show how media could be manipulated. Now, misinformation is what that presentation is about. And misinformation is what brings us to be misinformed. Now, that sounds like a very obvious statement. But how does misinformation affect us in our everyday lives? Now, let's explore that question a bit. And I'd like to start off by talking about the words rumor and innuendo. First, let's look at some synonyms to the word rumor. And those are gossip, chit-chat, storytelling, etc., etc. Now, the dictionary defines rumor in two ways. Number one, a generally circulated story, report, or statement without facts to confirm its truth. And number two, general talk or opinion of uncertain reliability. Now, let's look at the word innuendo. Synonyms for innuendo are ambiguity, suggestion, hint, or overtone. And the definition for innuendo is an indirect remark or gesture that usually carries a suggestion of impropriety. Now, with that, I'd like to tell you a story that I heard from a person that is very close to me. It deals with rumor and innuendo. And my friend was telling me about his aunt that married this guy when she was very young. And all she ever did while he was growing up was to talk bad about him behind his back. She would tell her nephew, my friend, all these stories about her new husband. But from all the bad things that he had always heard about his aunt's new husband, he thought he was the worst person in the world. Worst person since Hitler, as they say. Now, he actually met the guy when he was about 20 years old, and guess what? He was one of the nicest guys he's ever met. Like one of these really super cool guys and really super smart. So that story, it really made me think about what I hear from people, what I hear when someone's talking about another person and they're not there to defend themselves. Since then, I have a really strict rule in life. I don't automatically believe what people say about someone else, especially when they're not there to defend themselves. Now, that was a story from a friend of mine, but I hope we could all agree. I hope everyone out there listening can agree that rumor and innuendo do serious damage to a person or even a group of people's reputations. Now, I would like to ask everyone out there two questions. Number one, do we all realize how rumor and innuendo can harm our church? And number two, how does rumor and innuendo divide Christianity? All I've given you so far is one example of how Lies and rumor can be spread around in our everyday lives and can affect an individual person. But we can go farther than that. There are individuals out there, groups, governments, and members of the media that can also manipulate information on a grander scale than just one person talking to another. Now, what I call this is information manipulation. I could give you an example of what I mean. Now, I'm sure that most people in this country, and if not the world, have heard of the pedophile priest scandal that unfolded not so long ago. Now, I'd like to give you some facts that most of you may not know, because they are facts that are left out by the media. There's a report out there that was done by the University of New York. I have to get you the name of that report. But according to the report by the University of New York, it was only 4% of priests countrywide that were involved in that scandal. Now, that's 4% too many, I know. But that also means that 96% of priests were never involved in that scandal. Now, I just want to tell you a few more facts that contrast to that. And I apologize in advance for any teachers that might be listening out there tonight, but please bear with me. There is a point to this. According to FBI crime statistics, more than 21% of teachers countrywide are involved in inappropriate relationships with minors. Now, that's well over twice the average of priests. So a teacher is much more likely to become involved with a minor than a priest. Now, I just want to say that that also means that 79% of teachers out there aren't part of that scandal. And that's so that any teachers out there listening won't be mad at me. So, also, I'd like to contrast that with family members. 12% of all pedophilia is committed by family members. So family members are 3 times more likely than a priest to be involved in pedophilia. As a matter of fact, there is no information out there of any kind that would prove that priests are more susceptible to pedophilia than any other group. And as we could see through statistics, that it's just the opposite. These are all facts that the media likes to leave out. And with that in mind, any group out there can go through these types of problems in this area. Some examples are the Boy Scouts, foster parents, and non-Catholic clergy, just to name a few. Yet, it is said that 60% of all Americans believe that Catholic priests are regularly involved in inappropriate relationships with minors. Also, spin is added to the mix. When the media reports on these stories, they usually refer to it as inappropriate relationships with minors for any other group out there. But when reporting on a priest in the Catholic Church, the word pedophile is used. And that's because different groups, including the media and a lot of propagandists out there, use information and they manipulate information to lead people into different ideas. And that creates the movements that spread the beliefs and perpetuate the movements. Now, I'd like to give a good example on what I'm talking about. And that would be that the propaganda that is spread against the Catholic Church versus propaganda which promotes abortion. According to the propaganda, the Catholic Church is an evil corporation because it takes in billions of dollars on the backs of the poor and offers nothing in return. Now, I've heard this said in quite a few blogs and a couple of documentaries. Yet the abortion industry, another billion-dollar industry, by the way, is okay. And it's not just okay, but necessary for a woman's health. And anyone who challenges a woman's right to choose is demonized to the point of being Satan themselves. And that goes back to what people say about the Catholic Church, too, because the Catholic Church, for the most part, is pro-life. Now, in truth, the Catholic Church offers spiritual help, the sacrifice of Mass, and many, many charitable causes from within the Church. Planned Parenthood offers 3 things: contraceptives, death, and regret. The abortion industry comes from the contraception industry. The contraception industry comes from the human trafficking industry. And the human trafficking industry comes from the extortion industry. Let me allow to explain what I just said. That might be a bold claim. Back in the Middle Ages, and even farther back in antiquity than that, when a man died in debt, his debt was inherited by his wife and family. If the man who died was dealing with, let's just say, less than reputable lenders or loan sharks in today's terms, then they would oftentimes force the wife and sometimes even the children into prostitution in order to pay back the loan. That even goes on nowadays. If the woman then got pregnant, this would present a problem for the lender, or what we call nowadays a pimp. So there is where we get the development of contraceptives and abortion measures. Now I know that the propaganda that is spread against the Catholic Church tells us otherwise. But any committed Catholic who loves the Church will tell you that their parish is really their family, and their spiritual strength comes from Catholic teachings. Now, sometimes it's not just what is said, like a lie or a rumor, but it's also information that is withheld that can constitute innuendo. So what I'm really talking about here is not just information, but the control of information. What is said, what is withheld, and what is left to be forgotten and ignored. Now, a good example can be found in the actual history of the French Revolution. Please allow me to explain. I'd like to ask everyone out there, what do you know about the French Revolution? Now, if I ask this question in a classroom, what were the causes of the French Revolution? The answer I would get 9 out of 10 times would be that the poor were starving, the king was ignoring them, the church and the rich paid no taxes while the poor paid all the taxes, and the nobility failed to make meaningful reforms. Revolution was necessary. That's the answer that I'd get. and that's what's taught in history class. But here are some facts about the French Revolution that the average history student may not know. So we'll start with a couple of questions. Try to remember the name of the King of France during the French Revolution. Everyone out there knows that it was King Louis XVI. Wait a minute. Now, if you got that one, give yourself a point. But what other major historical event involved King Louis XVI? A lot of people don't realize that he was the very same king of France that came to our aid here in the English colonies when we fought for our independence. King Louis XVI was beheaded because during the revolution in France, they believed that his aid to the American revolutionaries was part of what put France in such debt. But without him, without King Louis, America might not have been able to beat the English back in 1776. Another question that I like to ask when I'm doing this presentation in a class is, who was the most infamous figure to come out of the French Revolution? Now think about that. Who would you say that is? A lot of people out there that I talk to have never heard of Maximilien Robespierre. Now, Maximilien Robespierre was the man responsible for tens of thousands of executions of French citizens for the terrible things like not fighting in the revolution or just for being Catholic. Now, how about, and I'm sure everybody's heard of this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, Napoleon was a general who fought alongside the Jacobins and other French revolutionaries who were very anti-Catholic. A lot of people don't know that. Some people think he was Catholic, and some people think he was pro-Catholic because he brought the church back after the revolution. But he was a member of the Jacobins, and the Jacobins are known in history for being very anti-Catholic. Now, I just want to tell you all a fact that most people may not know. We can credit the Jacobins and other anti-Catholic groups for much of what went on against our church during the French Revolution. I found a piece of propaganda that was used before the French Revolution, and it is a drawn picture by hand which depicts a call to hang priests and burn churches. Now, does anyone out there know how much Catholic martyrs came out of the French Revolution? We're talking about priests and nuns who were dragged from their churches, dragged out of their churches, and killed in the streets. Now, how many of you out there listening have ever heard of the civil constitution of the clergy? The civil constitution of the clergy was a measure that was called for by the Jacobins and Maximilien Robespierre, which forced Catholic clergy to renounce their obedience to Rome and the Pope, and to embrace obedience to the new French regime. Has anyone out there listening ever heard of the Carmelite martyrs of Compiègne? The Carmelite martyrs of Compiègne were 11 nuns, 3 lay sisters, and 2 novices that were guillotined to death for not signing the civil constitution of the clergy. Now, I just want to make something perfectly clear. The civil constitution of the clergy is historically documented as fact. But I could tell you about other events during the French Revolution. The September massacres, the genocide in the Vendée, the Vendée, and the drownings of Nantes. I'm butchering these pronunciations because they're French. But the September massacres produced several hundreds of Catholic martyrs, including deacons, priests, and bishops, also lay people, who were dragged out of their prison cells and summarily executed. The genocide in the Vendée, upwards of 290,000 people in the area of France known as the Vendée that were killed just for being Catholic. And it was justified by a Catholic counter-revolution that took place in that region. It seems as though some of the people in France at that time wanted to restore order. And the last on my list, but certainly not the last that I could talk about, was the drownings, or is the drownings of Nantes. Nantes, that's the best pronunciation I could come up with, excuse me. Deacons, priests, bishops, and lay people that were taken out by boats to the sea, tied up in the boats, and then the boats were purposely sunk beneath them. There are many books that you can read on that subject. All you have to do is look up the drownings of Nantes. So what was the cost in human lives for the social justice, the so-called social justice fought so hard for during the revolution in France? The initial revolution cost France 40,000 lives, upwards of 290,000 in the Vendée, roughly 50,000 in executions. Some estimates are as high as 500,000 for the revolution. So including the French revolutionaries, the French Revolutionary Wars fought against just about every other country in Europe, and the war started by Napoleon. An estimated 3 million Frenchmen, excuse me, can't talk tonight, Frenchmen, 3 million Frenchmen laid down their lives for the revolution and for Napoleon. And that's not even counting the other people from other countries that were killed defending themselves against Napoleon's army and the French revolutionaries. But guess what? Afterwards, the 2 institutions that the revolutionaries fought so hard to get rid of were restored: the monarchy and the Catholic Church. They worked very hard to get rid of the king and the monarchy, and very hard to get rid of the Catholic Church. And it was actually Napoleon Bonaparte that restored the Catholic Church. Now, doesn't that sound a lot like information that is being withheld? But that's just the beginning. What do we know about World War II? If I were to ask that question in a classroom, what would be the first thing that would come to mind? 6 million Jews that were systematically exterminated. Now, that's very tragic, of course. I don't want to take away from that. But aside from war casualties, a lot of people don't know and have never heard of the non-Jewish victims of the Holocaust at the hands of both the Nazis and the Communists. History usually leaves out the 3 million people mostly Catholics that were killed in Poland. Has anyone out there ever heard of the Dachau concentration camp? Now, this camp was one of the first concentration camps set up by the Nazis. And it was a camp inside Germany. Tens of thousands of non-Jewish German prisoners that were mostly Christian, both Catholic and Lutheran. And this includes priests, deacons, bishops, and lay people who spoke out against the regime. 32,000 documented deaths and thousands more that went undocumented. Now, next on my list is 11 million Russian Orthodox Christians who were starved to death in a forced famine. So what is a forced famine? The Russian forced famine is when the communists needed food to feed their army, so they took it from the civilian population, therefore causing a famine. And I could tell you about a little bit more about Christian persecutions in Poland at the hands of the Nazis. First, many priests, bishops, deacons, and laymen who were taken prisoner for working for the church. Now, St. Maximilian Kolbe was executed in Auschwitz. He was actually starved to death. But his death goes to show that there were actually many non-Jewish victims that were killed in Auschwitz. Now also, the Nazis supervised the expulsion of the Poles from their homes, the Poles meaning Polish people. And there were many summary executions that took place during that time, when the Nazis took a lot of people from their homes, kicked them out, and used their homes for Germans. Now, I just want to say that history tries to paint the entire German nation as Nazi. Actually, the Nazis were in charge of Germany and in charge of the army, but not everyone was for what the Nazis were doing. And actually, the Nazis did lie to a lot of people, because if they had told people the truth, the Nazis would have never come to power. They actually came to power from lies, through lies and force. But I'll go back a little bit further in history. There's the Cristeros War of Mexico. And with that, I'd like to tell you about Padre Vera's execution. Now, Padre Vera was a priest who was executed by firing squad for celebrating Holy Mass. There was also Padre Pro's execution. Padre Pro was executed basically for being a priest. He was running around Mexico City baptizing babies, celebrating Mass in secret, because it was illegal to celebrate Mass in Mexico at that time. Viva Cristo Rey were his last words, which means, long live Christ the King. Then there was little Jose Sanchez del Rio. He's now a saint, who was only 14 years old when they tortured him, marched him around his hometown of Sahuayo, Mexico, in the state of Michoacan, and then they executed him because he refused to renounce Christ. And Viva Cristo Rey were also his last words. Many everyday people, just regular Catholics, were hung from telephone poles for supporting the Cristeros. The Cristeros was the army that was put together to try to stop the federal government from killing priests. Now, everybody out there, hold on to your seats, because what I'm about to tell you about is very upsetting. And we're going into what happened during the Spanish Civil War. The most disturbing thing that I found out about the Spanish Civil War was that the atheist army that ran that war were disinterring nuns and putting their corpses on public display. There's also a lot of Spanish martyrs that came from the Spanish Civil War. Nuns who were summarily shot on the head for refusing to denounce Christ. And the same thing was done to priests. I found a picture on the internet which displays atheists using a statue of Christ for target practice. Now, all this is a lot of information that people have never heard of. This is information that is being withheld. That's my whole point of bringing all this to light. Why is it that these histories are not well known? There's also the Irish forced famine, brought on by England's need to feed their army. And that was during the English Revolution. A lot of people don't know, but it was Thomas Cromwell that brought that on. Tens of thousands of martyrs that we have from King Henry VIII's reign. He's the one that took property from the church and turned it into Anglican church property. And then we got tens of thousands more from his daughter, Elizabeth I. Going way back in history, we have martyrs that came from Edward I and his wars against Catholic Scotland and France. A lot of people might know his story because he was portrayed in the movie Braveheart. Well, it does look like I'm running out of time, and I have so much more to talk about when it comes to persecutions that have taken place in history against the Catholic Church. And the reason why I'm talking about this is I'm trying to point out a lot of information that is withheld, histories that aren't talked about. A lot of people are very stunned and shocked when I tell them about what happened in Mexico in the 1920s during the Cristeros War. The question that I always get is, isn't Mexico mainly Catholic? Oh yeah, that's true, but the belief is that Mexico is 90% Catholic. That's not true. The fact of the matter is that Mexico is the religious part of Mexico is 90% Catholic. So we're not including all the atheists that are in Mexico, or people who don't have anything to do with religion. And it's also, this belief also comes from the misinformation that's out there that states that atheists are included in that. Atheists aren't included in this count. And neither are Satanists. They're only counting the numbers that we're looking at when you say 90% Catholic in Mexico are only including religious people of major religions like Judaism, Islam, Christianity, even Buddhists. But the smaller religions aren't included in that. So Mexico, all in all, isn't 90% Catholic. I bring this up because of the persecutions that went on there. Also, everybody knows that 3% of the population control most of its wealth, and that's true in Mexico too. 3% of the population in Mexico controls all the power in Mexico. Well, I'm all out of time now, so I'm going to have to say goodnight. And I hope that everybody out there listening tonight can join us here again in 2 weeks from now for this show, Know Your Faith. Same web address, same time. So take care and may God be with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.